Now, all societies, now as humans we live in societies, and all societies comprise of what we call as a set of relationships. And these relationships are held together by what are known as norms and rules. For example, there are norms of marriage, there are rules of interaction, there are values that inform those rules and norms, whether a society is patriarchal, whether a society is hierarchical, whether a society is egalitarian, that is, there is more equality. All these define different kinds of societies. A village society, tribal society, city and urban society. So these are all various different manners of societies into which humans can live. Most of humanity has always lived in what we call as primary group relations. This is what we can also known as the unit, a building block. Like we have a building made of bricks, the primary group are the smallest units which can be seen as the bricks that make society. In our society, the family can be seen as the primary group, which is the most fundamental, the most basic and the smallest unit of social relationships which bind people together. But then there are other kinds of such small what we call as face-to-face groups. Groups where people have the closest and the most intimate relationships. These can be, of course, the family is ubiquitous, it is found all over the world in every society, but then there are friendship groups, there are interest groups, there can be people who are very close to each other pursuing some particular goal or particular aim in life. So there can be other kind of primary groups also, but family is the most basic because family is the group from which society reproduces itself. Societies reproduce themselves, reproduce their organization not only through just physical, biological reproduction, they produce other social beings. That is, the family helps not just to reproduce human children, but it also reproduces the different parts of society. Now, all societies have different parts. The smallest societies, the simplest societies have very few parts. In other words, what are these parts? These parts are based on the what we call as the division of labor. All societies need to survive by performing certain tasks. Primary, of course, are tasks of subsistence, food production, food distribution. If not production, then acquiring food, acquisition food. We have basically two broad divisions of economy, an acquisitive economy and a productive economy. The foraging societies, the hunting food gathering societies are example of the acquisitive economy. They don't produce anything, but they collect things from the environment as they exist. They hunt or they collect food. But for that also some division of labor is required. And the simplest division of labor is between the two known divisions of human species. And the known divisions are, of course, male and female. So this is a given. We don't have to create it. This is already there. So this already existing division is used as the most primary form of division of labor, and even in the simplest societies we find that more or less, this is not a very rigid division of labor in simple societies, also of course not in more complex societies, but it is a kind of convenient division so that men go for hunting and women do the gathering. That doesn't mean that women cannot also hunt for small animals, or men will not collect food when they see it in the forest when they go hunting. This small unit based on division of labor between the husband and wife who produce children, they reproduce the identity of whichever society to which they belong. Now, if I belong to a tribe, say, then the children born into that tribe reproduce that tribe. They do not reproduce in general the human species. Although it would be very nice if people could say that I am only human and nothing else, but that is not what we find, because we do live in societies. And we do say that, okay, I am an Indian, or I belong to this caste, I belong to this region, I belong to this ethnic group, my father was this, or my. So we have what we call as a social identity within the society. And this family, or there are some other means, of course family is the most, I mean it is, as far as we know, the universal means of reproducing this society. And then from family we have larger groups. Groups of families form larger groups. Or we can say in other way that larger groups can be broken down into smaller units of the families. Now every individual, as I am talking of identity, every individual in a society has an identity that is based on some criteria that one person is born with, like if you are first, the most primary identity being born a man or a woman, then born into a particular kind of first division, social division, that is born into if you are a tribal society, then you are born into a particular clan or a lineage. If you are in a Hindu society, you are born into a particular caste or subdivision of caste, a jati. Then you are born in a regional, a larger region of the world, whether you are born in Japan or you are born in China or you are born in the USA, you have to carry that identity. So these are the identities that we carry by birth. But then these are not the only identities we have, because in society there are much work to be done. And this work, the work that is done within society is called as a role. A role has to be played. Now somebody has to bring up the child. Who brings up the child? Somebody has given birth to that child. That person, that woman is known as a mother. That is, the role of a mother is to nurture the child. The role of a father is to nurture the child and the mother and of course the family. Similarly, there is a role of a teacher, the role of a hunter, there is a role of a king. So in the society we have many tasks, as many tasks to be performed, that many roles are there. Now when we talk of a society, what is a simple society and what is a complex society? When a society is simple, there are fewer tasks and fewer roles. In a hunting food gathering society, people are mothers and fathers, people are kin, people are hunters, people are food gatherers, people may be shamans. So there may be in all say 50, 40 roles going around in society, but not more. You can be a healer, you can be a magician, but there is that much. But look at today's society, a complex society. The more complex a society grows, the more labor gets divided, tasks get divided. Like today, earlier we used to say a doctor is a doctor. Today we cannot say that. We'll have to ask what kind of a doctor, because whether he is an eye specialist or a bone specialist. So one role of a doctor has now been subdivided into many other roles of various specialists, and now we have super specialists. So even those are getting divided. What does it mean? It means that society is getting more and more complex. Then I was talking about the family reproducing the society. The family reproduces the society through what is called as the process of socialization. As the child is growing up, the child learns all the ways of that society, including the language, including the customs, the food habits, the rules, the norms and the values. And these are all incorporated initially into the child that is growing up, and then as it grows further, it imbibes the other roles and other tasks. Like for example, once a child becomes little older, we send it to a school. Then from a school, it learns. As it becomes even older, becomes an adult, then it decides whether I want to be a doctor or an engineer. So it takes off different tasks. So this is how society creates more social individuals who will keep stepping into the various roles and tasks that a society has, the occupations, the livelihoods, and the initial initiation, learning to be a social being, learning language, which is the first part, learning how to interact with others, learning how to live and become part of society. The primary socialization takes place in the primary group of the family. Now, there are many types, as I said, from simple to complex, there are many kinds of societies. The simplest societies are what we call as band societies. These are primary group societies, and but again, no society is static, no society is unchanging. As we talk of generation gap, there is always transformation, because each generation, even within the same society, is learning new things. It is new tasks are coming up. Like when I was growing up, when I was a child, we never knew what a computer scientist was, because there were no computers. So that task wasn't there, that role was not there. That entire paraphernalia, what we call as the IT industry, wasn't there. It did not exist. So society was different. 50 years back, the society was different. Even further back, for example, things were different. There was one point when everybody was a forager, and they all lived in hunting in band societies, which were very small primary group relationships, which subsisted on hunting and food gathering, where the division of labor was based on only age and sex. There was no authority, there was no centralized authority, and people would make decisions through cooperation. Then we came to slightly more complex societies, what we call as kinship based society. Now here again, these happened because the mode of subsistence changed. From hunting food gathering, we come to pastoral economies, we come to shifting cultivators. Now shifting cultivators and pastoral economies need to hold large tracts of resources collectively, and for this collective resource holding, they need to have larger groupings, bigger than a band, bigger than a primary group. So you have lineage based societies, you have clan based societies. Meyer Fortes, an anthropologist, had defined a certain kind of a group as a corporate lineage group, by which he meant these were lineage groups based on a single mode of descent, that is either from mother or from father, matrilineal or patrilineal, but which functioned as a political economic entity, not just as a kinship group. Now a kinship group is relational group. It is based on sentiments, affection, and also blood and marriage. But a corporate group has a political and economic identity. And in many societies, the kinship group functions as a corporate group, in the sense that this is the resource holding group. So we have a pastoral community, we have large tracts of pasture land. Now this pasture land needs to be defended and kept within that community for their use, and for that they have to collectively take care of it. So here also, as we see, as part of social organization, there are very important aspects which we call as the political and economic aspects, apart from the kinship aspect, apart from the fact that you have families and you have children born into families and they are socialized and they grow up. You have factors of resource holding, and when we talk of resource holding, we also talk of property relations, inheritance. Now inheritance and property relations come only at a certain stage of social organization. They come at a certain stage of social organization where the concept of ownership comes in. Now in the foraging societies who are forest dwellers, there is no ownership. Everybody lives in the forest and everything is a common good, a free good. Anybody can use anything. So nobody owns anything. So there is no question of any ownership. But when you go a little slightly more complex, when you have animal husbandry, when you have your own herd of animals, those animals need food, and for their food you need pastures, and you must have ownership, some kind of, not what we call as a real ownership, but a user right. Now, legally we make difference between user right and ownership right. So, these groups which need to own resources must have then rights. This question of rights only comes in as we see, as we are developing social organization, stage by stage new concepts are coming in. Initially there was no concept of ownership, there was no concept of any good belonging to somebody, everything was there for everyone. Then with the particular form of subsistence, the concept of ownership comes in. When ownership comes in, right of user is the first thing. So, who can use these resources? Only those who can use these resources were part of that lineage or kinship group. And kinship group, you can become a member either by being born into it or being married into it. So, if you are a matrilineal descent group, then property passes through the women, and men who marry into that group have rights of user, and opposite for the patrilineal descent groups. But the right of user is not right of possession, in the sense that people who collectively, what we call as commons, the common resource is only there for use, the common resource cannot be disposed of. Nobody can dispose of or sell the pasture land that is held in common by the group. Nobody can sell anything in the forest that is held by the group, you can only use it. Nobody can sell the land that is held collectively by the shifting cultivators, they are only belong to the group. The group can be a lineage group, that is where the ancestry is known, 3 to 4 generations, 5 generations, or it can be in case of larger groups, again the size makes a difference. Larger groups with more resources, it can be a clan where you have a mythical ancestor, so the clans are much bigger than lineages. Then there can be village groups also. Now, in the first stage we had band societies which were only based on people living together. This was more based on consensus, I want to live with each of you, I am here, and they were very fluid. The band organization was very fluid. It was based on bilateral kinship, marriages were also not very stable. People moved from band to band, mainly conditioned by the availability of resources which were free in the environment. Then the lineage groups are based on kinship, on ties of blood and marriage. Then a third kind of grouping is what we call a spatial social organization. Spatial social organizations are identified through their settlements. Now, this can only happen when you come to a level of subsistence like settled agriculture, where people can settle down and make their villages, or of course later on cities, but initially villages, which they stay over generations, so that they become a kind of possessor of that village. Now, with settled cultivation also comes a different kind of man to land relationship. The man to land relationship here tends to become permanent over generations. The father tills the land, he hands it down to his son, or mother owns the land which is handed down to her daughter, they may not till it, but they own it. So, matrilineal or patrilineal, it is owned and passed down. And when this ownership is passed down, when labor is being invested, and why is it owned? Because permanent cultivation is labor intensive. And also you are using the grains from one season to the other, there is a continuity. In pastoral economy and shifting cultivation, there is no continuity. But in settled cultivation, there is continuity, and with this continuity comes the concept of individual property ownership. And individual property ownership makes a very different kind of social organization than social organizations based on collective common ownerships. So, individual property ownership means that the rights of user now become right of possessor. Right of possessor means that you can buy and sell. I mean, when land becomes a property, which again doesn't become till capitalist economy sets in. Now, therefore, we find that when we have capitalist economy, when we have a state based society, it becomes incompatible with these earlier modes of social organization. Common ownership of land or having no rights or being free goods, these don't then continue. They have to change or they come in conflict with the state. Now, from these spacious social organization, we come to more complex societies, what we call as the urban societies. And urban societies can only become possible when we have enough technological advance or enough production, so that there is a surplus, and the surplus can be used by strata of society that are non-producers. This division of society into producers and non-producers produces what we, or is the building block or the initiator of what we call as a urban civilization, which becomes much more complex, where there are complex rules of ownerships, where some parts of land are actually owned by somebody who does not actually till it. So, while there is a separation between producers and non-producers, there becomes a separation between producers, workers and owners. And this is how stratification takes place. The stratification, the upper classes, the city, most people who live in city or who are part of that elite, what we call, they own land but they don't work, or they do some other kind of work. They are soldiers or they are administrators, they can be intellectuals, they can, and again somewhere along the line with settled agriculture came the technology of writing. And when writing came, there was a great possibility of complex social organizations emerging, because writing gave rise to the possibility of accumulation of knowledge. So, earlier, even when people used to teach others, it was just a temporary relationship. It would end with the lifetime of the teacher and the learner. But with accumulated writing, knowledge itself becomes a resource, and control over that resource gives a lot of power. So, as societies become complex, what we are seeing is, as social organizations become more and more complex, we see that the nature of power, the distribution of power becomes more and more stratified, unequal. So, in the foraging societies, in the face-to-face primary relationships, there is very little hierarchy. People consult each other, they cannot order each other. But when society becomes more complex and more complex, the complexity itself requires that there has to be more and more use of force. For example, if we divide society into producers and non-producers, and the surplus of the producers is taken away to feed the non-producers, it requires some degree of force, some kind of exercise of power. Otherwise, why would I or anybody produce for somebody else? And this, we are talking of a non-market society. In the initial stratification, there was no market. So, people produced extra that was just extracted because of the hierarchy of power. So, power becomes more and more stratified, then different kinds of power come up. In modern society, we find that there are numerous locations of power. There is political power, there is economic power, there is power of knowledge, there is power of persuasion, there is people from very different points of location on these very complex map of social organization can exert their influence, as we say. They can contest, they can protest, they can influence, and so things have become very complex. And complexity does not mean society becomes better. Better in the sense the quality of life. People are not happier in complex societies. People have more material achievements in complex societies. They may have to work much more. Like it has been noted by anthropologists that people in foraging societies actually work very little because their needs are little. Once your stomach is full, you can sleep under the tree. But in a capitalist society, when needs become more And in that complex hierarchy of power, needs are not related only to food, they are related to prestige, power, control, manipulation, so many different ways in which we can use power, and in so many different ways in which we can use this control. We need more and more to again reproduce the complexity of the society. So, all human beings as social persons are always in such a position that they tend to reproduce. So, if it is a complex societies, then you are that many people being socialized into that many kinds of occupations or roles in order to reproduce that complexity. And some of these roles may go away and some new ones can come. So, society keeps changing. Some specialists that used to be earlier no longer exist, and some new things come up, new ways of exerting power come up. Also society moves. I mean, it is not always stratified. It was a feudal society, then it becomes a democratic society, like so the equations of power keep shifting. So, when we talk of social organization, we are actually talking of something which is dynamic, which is more or less self-producing, reproducing, but which is also over a long period of time, we see a greater degree of complexity exists. It is not in evolutionary terms that we can say we are becoming better. We are not becoming better, we are only becoming more and more convoluted, more complex, creating actually more problems which come with that complexity.